hear more about space and the space economy and space law really is because of SpaceX. I mean, if you had to focus on one company that has done more to create a economy in space that's accessible, it's SpaceX. And
there is a war going on right now between the United States and Iran, and it's basically they say you cannot have nuclear weapons. Do you foresee something like this that prohibits some nations, some rogue nations, or however they label them, from accessing or reaching for the space or United States? Who's responsible for cleaning the debris from the orbit? Because those are dangerous. We have heard several times they actually fell on different countries and they caused damages and harms. So how do you see the future of space travel, space exploration, space laws? How do you see 50 years from now?
It's hard. That's a great question. I mean, it's hard to tell.
Travel to Mars and live there, or do you think we should pay more attention to our planet? Because we know life exists here.
Well,
that's fun. Do you think we landed on the moon?
Actually, I think about that a lot, and
throughout history, humanity has expanded its frontiers. We crossed oceans, mapped continents, flew across the skies, and eventually reached space. Space, the final frontier. But every new frontier raises the same questions. Who owns it? Who governs it? Can anyone claim it? Today, we're going to explore the exciting and fascinating history and the future of space law. Joining me today is Joey Corliano. He's an attorney specializing in space law, one of the newest and fastest growing fields of international law. Welcome, Joey.
Thank you.
Before we start, I want to give our viewers a short bio of you. So Joey is a lawyer and he's also an entrepreneur. He worked across industries including UAS, unmanned aerial systems, biotechnology, healthcare, and space technology. He helped advance emerging technologies for national security applications within the US government, innovations, accelerators, and startups. Joey currently is the founding attorney at his law firm, Severance Law. Previously, Joey was a program manager for the Defense Innovation of On-Ramp Hub program by the Defense Innovation Unit. Joey has a JD from New York Law School and a bachelor's degree from the University of Washington. Thank you very much for joining me. Yeah. When we talked about this subject, and you had a couple of talks about it in Olympic Club and other places, I found it fascinating because you never think about space law until you hear from someone. Let's just start by telling our viewers why we need the space laws, how did it start, and what's involved in this field.
Yeah, so space law, I think the origins of space law were in the 1960s or so, and it was when Russia and the US began the space race. And when I think of space law, I think it's much different than the laws that we normally talk about on the terrestrial planet. When we think about laws in space, they sound quite unusual, or like it seems like an unusual thing to have laws in space. But it makes a lot of sense when you think about it. When we have foreign countries in space interacting and doing different activities, there has to be norms and regulations and a way of acting that people understand and that conforms to certain rules and regulations so that those activities can be safe and predictable. And that's one thing I think about when I think of space law and how it started.
So initially, the first major event we got to space is Sputnik,
Right.
1957, if I'm not mistaken. And after that, NASA was established and the space programs started, and we started exploring a new territory. So when the first laws about the space felt to be needed, was it an international organization, or it was just between the superpowers of the time? They said, hey, we need to have some rules and regulation here, because I know American astronauts always worked with Russian cosmonauts, so there was communication.
Yeah, I think one way to think about it is the reason why we have those rules and regulations is to prevent a war, is really why those rules probably existed at that time. It was a way of preventing something that could kind of snowball out of hand in outer space if both of the countries did not know what each other were doing. That's one thing I think about why space law came about, and what really forced that space law to come about in the 1960s was to have some sort of predictability. And I'm sure the people that were crafting those laws were probably thinking to themselves, or the norms of interacting in space were thinking to themselves, well, what happens if we don't have these? And one thing that could happen is misunderstanding of what's going on in space, and some sort of potentially even a war. And I think that's what was going through the people's minds back then.
That actually makes sense, because first, imagine you're Columbus, and you find a new world here.
Sure.
And then the question is, who owns it? Who can claim it? Who can govern that? The space is no different than that, except there are complications which only applies to extraterrestrial, not the terrestrial that we live.
Yes, that's exactly right. And if you think of the exploration of the New World, there was a lot of very unfortunate conflict.
Yes.
When the explorers were exploring, and the Native Americans were obviously on the continent, and there was a lot of suffering, let's be honest, that happened during that exploration. And there was a lot of conflict, and there was a lot of trying to understand who owns what in the New World. And things changed hands. You know, they changed hands from one country to another as countries fought over it. I think that's a really interesting analogy, and one that could help us learn and understand maybe what could be done better in space when it comes to space law.
Yeah. And so when Apollo mission finally landed on the moon, and the flag of the United States was established there, what does that mean exactly? The moon belongs to the United States. So when we see that, when Neil Armstrong does that, what does it mean? It means, okay, we are here, we claim this as something that belongs to the United States, because no other nation ever landed humans on the moon.
Yeah, I think you could think of that in different ways. If you remember back during that time, it was a huge national priority for Russia and the U.S. to go to the moon, and it was an area that was an achievement that was really going to make them feel very accomplished, the citizens of either country, whoever did it first.
Yes.
So I think the ceremonial aspect of it was smart, and it was very intentional, because I think the U.S., being the first on the moon, wanted to have some sort of, there wasn't a geographic claim, but it looked like it it looked like it in the video. You could argue that it appeared to be so. It was It was done in a way that made it look as if the U.S. was potentially claiming something on the moon. Now, they weren't, because the laws were such that that wasn't the case, but you've got to give the credit to the optics of it.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Also, it was the battle of ideologies.
Yes.
Because communism wants to say we can achieve such a feat, and then capitalism, the United States says, we'll be there before you. So there was more than that. So in preparing for this episode, I reviewed several major treaties that exist for space law. Outer Space Treaty, 1967, Rescue Agreement, 1968, Liability Convention, 1972, Registration Convention, 1975, and Moon Agreement, 1979. Who was the body that organized and wrote these agreements, these treaties? Was it between some powers that they had access to this space, or it was part of a international
that time, most interactions and most regulations and treaties that were developed were done by diplomats of different countries, which I think we'll talk about later, but now that's changed a lot. There's a lot of lobbying by different corporations, which is quite different. But during that time, there was a lot of there was a diplomatic effort rather than a corporate effort that we see now.
So you mentioned corporate. What if SpaceX or any of these corporations, they land on the moon and establish bases and start, for instance, mining the moon? Who has the right to do that? What kind of regulations are in place or need to be, and how mature are the space laws?
Well, the space laws now are mature enough that they argue that you can extract resources from different areas in outer space, asteroids or the moon, and that's one thing that was made clear in the Artemis Accords, which are rather recent, and they tried to make it very clear that the resources could be extracted. But what you have to think about is, for resources to be extracted, there has to be some sort of geographic placement of people or bases and things like that. And I think that's where the law falls short. There is an understanding that they can extract resources, but it's less of an understanding of how infrastructure can be placed, because if you're placing infrastructure, that's essentially de facto claiming of territory. So, I mean, that's a really interesting part of space law right now, in my opinion, is this tension between extracting resources and also the lack of property rights. They seem to be in complete conflict with each other.
And do you think we have enough laws that we can look into those laws, copy those, and apply it to the space? Or how would you come up with new laws or regulations for space? Because we're not just talking about solar system. So if we're going to build something, it should cover much larger space than just the solar system or the moon.
Mm-hmm. Well, space lawyers have looked to the maritime law. That's one area we could talk about that they have looked at for trying to figure out how to claim territory or property, or how to extract resources. Obviously, we have found a way in maritime space for fishermen to extract resources and fish without claiming the territory. So that's one thing that we could think about. Also, you could think about Antarctica. That's an interesting region of the world where there's been different countries that have claimed territory, and it's a region that has been kind of broken up into different areas by those countries in the northern hemisphere. Those are some things that come to mind.
And it makes sense to use maritime laws. How about national laws? because this is a fairly new topic to talk about,
Sure,
and
yeah.
as we progress, I questions comes to mind. So there are also national laws, right? Like United States has some national laws as far as the space, how can different companies send satellites or a spaceship or whatever. And do you know which countries they have those national laws, or what's the difference between a national law to when we talk about this space and international law? Is it just national is just access to the space, or
Well,
traffic?
The way I think about that is you have to think about who's enforcing things.
Yes, exactly.
Whenever you have a law, you always have to figure out who the enforcer is. So when you have a national law, it's pretty clear who the enforcer is. It's the government, the nation of that country. And the issue is that we've seen an issue with the United Nations enforcing laws. Same thing with potentially international space laws, is you have to ask the question of who is going to enforce them. And that's why I am of the belief that enforcement is going to be of an issue, a serious issue. But what is most important for the most important direction for space law to go into is focusing on creating norms and regulations that are well understood by countries, because everyone's going to be safer if you adhere to those. It's kind of like a highway, or trying to drive a car in a city or a highway, and having rules and an understanding of how the car is going to drive. And that way, the person not driving the car is going to be safe, and also the people around the person driving are going to be safe.
Like any other technology, as soon as we have a technology, we find it useful, military comes in and tries to add military applications for that technology. And this happened, obviously. Or even maybe it started based on military use. The whole space exploration started based on that. And what kind of protections are in place today? For instance, China started shooting down other satellites. They were doing that. What kind of laws can prevent that, and what are the consequences of breaking those laws?
Well, that's kind of a opaque area, because there's only so much individual people, especially a layperson like me, knows about that subject. So it's a little bit difficult for us to fully understand how that works. But you're right. There's been open source information that foreign countries, Russia, as you mentioned, China, Russia and the Ukraine conflict was disrupting the SpaceX satellites. And it makes you wonder how that can be stopped or how that can be regulated. And what comes to mind is it's kind of like what we were just talking about, that if there's not an international organization to enforce, then the countries will enforce themselves. And I think that's what what we're just bringing up here about China, Russia, and the U.S. and the activities that are being conducted in space. They likely are the enforcers of a lot of these activities, and that's how it's being conducted right now.
Because I remember in the 80s, the whole Star Wars project was about putting weapons in the space, and that was a source of legitimate concerns for many nations. And now there are more players internationally. Many countries, they have the capabilities of putting satellites into the orbit, whether for GPS support or military espionage and all those things. And obviously, opposing nations or nations that they are at war on Earth, they could start something in a space and attacking each other's satellites.
Well, that's exactly right. And I mean, we have records and open source material that's already happened. Now, one thing that's really interesting about that is there's very little civilian oversight of what's going on in space. There's very little oversight of citizens of what's going on in space. If there's a international conflict, we have journalists.
Yes.
And luckily we have journalists that will cover the war, or hopefully cover the war. At least we have people like that exist and have the means to do that. Whereas in space, I mean, we just really don't know.
Yeah.
And that would be a really interesting thing to have if we had journalists that were able to undercover and understand what's going on in space. I think with that lack of visibility, it's really hard to understand what's going on militarily, and it's hard to perhaps maybe keep people accountable for what they're doing as well.
Exactly. And we're talking about space. Let's make something clear. Let's establish some definitions here. We have space, and then we have outer space. So all of our satellites are still within the Earth's atmosphere and their orbits. And when we talk about outer space, it's literally outside of the Earth, outside of the atmosphere. And when we get to that, there are not many players. So when we talk about the range of this law, how far this law goes, right now it's just the space. It's not outer space, correct?
Well, one thing to think about is there's satellites in different areas of orbit.
Yeah.
There's low Earth orbit, which is at a lower altitude, and then there is the geostationary orbit, which is quite a bit higher. And as you said, for sure in the geostationary orbit, there is less countries, international countries, that are able to develop satellites that can get out that far.
I remember, I think, again, back in I don't remember exactly when was it launched to, we had a Mir station, which was a Russian space station. It was put into orbit and everybody was using it. And then the International Space Station was created, which is a cooperation between multiple nations, and they built it and they put it into the space. And when people, that's another aspects of this law perhaps, when people go to space, now you have a different set of laws and rules that applies to individuals. So up until now, we're only talking about satellites and machines in the space. So when humans go there, what kind of complications is the space law going to face?
Well, there's going to be a lot of complications. So that's a great question. I believe in the International Space Treaty, how they handled it is the individual people that were from different countries or different countries, that they kind of brought their laws with them, which just on its face creates a lot of issues on how, if those people are interacting with each other, how those laws are going to be interpreted. But there's a lot of room for space law to grow. And, one way to think about it is those that are focused on drafting and creating these laws want to see how things work out and what works, what doesn't work, and want to perhaps put the foundational pieces in place. And then as we learn more, the law is going to kind of build off of itself in a foundational way. I think that's what people are thinking about. The thing it reminds me of is, so I have a background in unmanned aerial systems, drones, and there's different laws that regulate drones. And what was clear is when I started my career there, their laws weren't exactly fully formed. And then as time went on, the FAA was able to understand how to regulate it more carefully, and that happened in the drone industry. And I think it's probably going to happen in the space space industry as well.
Do you think space exploration growing faster than the laws that are needed to manage, which makes sense? I think that's the natural way of events to happen.
Yeah, I absolutely think that, and that's how that's what happened in some ways with the drone industry, and you could argue that there was an overzealous kind of focus on creating laws in the drone industry that have now hurt the commercial market. If you look at Amazon, there's laws holding back Amazon from accomplishing their goals in the drone market.
How so?
Well, Amazon was very ambitious with creating its Amazon Prime Air program, and they've ran into regulatory trouble into trying to figure out how to operate all these drones in populated areas. And you could say for very good reason, it's not safe and it shouldn't be done. But point being is that that's an area where laws and regulations have perhaps stifled growth. And I'm sure the space companies are lobbying for less laws, much less laws. Yeah. And they don't want their growth to be stifled because they just see the laws as stifling their growth. So.
So drone has been a good testing ground for the space laws and space rules that what could happen. I put together a quick list of events that actually between 1975 and 2026 Artemis program actually brought nations together to work and be concerned about that. For instance, Apollo-Soyuz test project, which ended up with Helsinki Accords, Moon Agreement, proposes that lunar resources belong to all humanity, and first space shuttle launch inaugurates the era of in 1981, which Ronald Reagan becomes the president during the Cold War, and competition intensifies. So shuttle program, moon landing, work between the United States and Soviet Union to historically to cooperate when it comes to the space. So there was a lot of different times in history that nations came together and said, we need to work together, we need the technology. And interestingly, I don't know if this is still true or not, but I believe one of the requirements for American astronauts was to learn Russian language, because a lot of equipment and a lot of communications was in Russian language. So from Sputnik to Artemis, tell us about this Artemis era. This Artemis, is it a treaty or is it an agreement? What does it include?
Yes, it's a treaty, and it is, I believe, been signed by over 70 countries. And what it does is it's doing things like some of the things that we discussed, making it more easily for countries and companies to explore outer space. I believe in that. In the Artemis Accords, one of the important provisions was the ability to extract resources, and that's probably one of the most important provisions for any corporation that's going into space. If you were an executive at Blue Origin or SpaceX, you'd be really happy to see that. That would be very good to know that that's going to be allowed. So I think it was a step in the right direction for corporations to do some of the exploring. And keep in mind, what we're going to see is it's going to be less and less countries that are focusing on exploration or activities in space, and it's going to be focused more on corporations.
Yes.
And that does have some impact on laws, and we can talk about that now or later. But I would say the Artemis Accords are focused on, I think one way to think about it is creating some sort of incentive as well for companies to explore outer space so that resources are going to be available to be extracted. So that's one way I think about it.
And you touched upon the corporations, and that's something that we see, again, probably this is a little bit ideological, but you see it in the capitalist countries where you have corporations and they can grow and do many things that they cannot do in other systems. So when it comes to the corporations such as SpaceX, Blue Origin, and other corporations, how active these corporations are. So we hear a lot about the SpaceX. Who else is in this game, and how this competition is moving forward?
Yeah, well, there's you obviously hear a lot about SpaceX and Blue Origin, but keep in mind, think of the SpaceX or the Blue Origin, their products. Think of all the supply chain they need in order to create what they're creating, and a lot of those have basically spawned off companies, small companies, startups that are innovating to help provide what SpaceX and Blue Origin need. So SpaceX and Blue Origin has almost kind of created a space economy because their products are so important for creating a runway or a pathway to space. But they've also created, especially here in America, a lot of smaller companies that support them. And Seattle Western Washington is a very important area for space manufacturing. We have it has a long history of being a aviation region with Boeing. It has a lot of high-tech talent, and it has Amazon here. SpaceX has an office. A lot of space startups are here as well, and I think that's a really interesting question because SpaceX and Blue Origin have kind of paved the way for smaller companies to exist. It wouldn't be very easy for small space companies to exist if it wasn't for Blue Origin or SpaceX.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And when they roll out their programs, the cost of achieving their goals is a fraction of what the government used to do the same thing, and technologies are impressive.
Yes, absolutely. So the reason why we hear more about space and the space economy and space law really is because of SpaceX. I mean, if you had to focus on one company that has done more to create a economy in space that's accessible, it's SpaceX. And what they've done is their cost for putting something into space is just been dramatically decreased with their technology innovation. I don't have the statistics off the top of my head, but there's been a order of magnitude reduction in what it costs to put something in space per pound or kilogram from 30, 40 years ago to what it costs now with a SpaceX vehicle.
Yeah. So that has actually helped this industry.
Yes, absolutely.
To move forward much faster than the last 60, 70 years. But it's still, they owe everything to those pioneers that started this industry. So another thing came to my mind was thinking about different countries. They want to have access to space. They want to put satellites in there for spying on others or military purposes or whatever it is. And do you compare that with nuclear non-proliferation? That some countries, there's a war going on right now between the United States and Iran. And it's basically they say you cannot have nuclear weapons. Do you foresee something like this that prohibits some nations, some rogue nations, or however they label them, from accessing or reaching for the space, or no?
Well, I really like that question. I've never thought of it like that, so that's really interesting. And Yes, absolutely. And I think I'll answer this in a kind of a unique way. Obviously, there's restrictions on non-proliferation, nuclear issues, and those are at the forefront of our daily news right now. Yes, the same thing exists in space. The same thing exists for space right now, actually, at this moment. So ITAR, International Treaty on Arms Regulation, is and other treaties essentially bar the sharing of technology, U.S. technology, from being shared with foreign countries. And there's some the U.S. doesn't look kindly on issues related to ITAR or ITAR non-compliance. So that actually is happening now. I would argue that those ITAR is being used to restrict some other countries' use of space technology. Now, if they develop it themselves, that it's a little bit harder to restrict, but you would argue that these countries are probably going to have a little bit of trouble creating it because they don't have the space economy that the United States has.
Of course.
And as you were mentioning a few moments ago, we have a capitalist system that rewards this quite a bit, and other countries are going to miss out on that. And the U.S. has a system in place on how to prevent countries from getting that technology. They've been using it for many years, and it's the ITAR restrictions.
So, thinking about this space law, do you see a different body of a different governing body that controls these laws specifically for the space, sort of like Star Trek? What was it? Confederation or some kind of federation, which which controls all the laws and regulations about the space, and it's going to be separate from the terrestrial or international organizations that we have. That these countries, they have to reach out, they get permissions or something to regulate and control coming and going of nations to the space. Would that make sense to create such a thing, or it's going to be part of another organization inside the United Nations?
Well, great question. I'll answer it this way. I think there's a lot of countries that are going to push back on that, because I think what you were describing is a very kind of UN-style way of regulating the world. And what we've seen is individual countries, the United States, Russia, they don't appreciate that. And I'm a little hesitant on giving an organization or a international organization like the UN control over space activities. It does feel just feels like we're giving an organization too much control that doesn't necessarily have like citizens voting for those rules. Yeah. Like at least in the U.S., when we're passing laws, there's citizens that are voting for those rules. Whereas when you have an international organization like the UN, you tend to perhaps have rules and regulations that feel arbitrary or for special interests. So I think it's possible that could happen, absolutely. I think it would be the wrong approach. The best approach I have now perhaps is focusing on maybe self-governance. Now that would only be after people are able to establish residences on the moon or Mars. But I foresee some sort of self-governance that was done, like was done when the settlers settled the U.S. and there was a strong interest to govern themselves. That's what I foresee.
Yes. This next question is probably established. The answer is definitely established. And the question is, when we talk about the airspace of a country or space above the country. So there are rules and regulations. They say, okay, you cannot evade another country's airspace. So how high is that? So if someone is above the United States in some orbit, a satellite, is it still considered that evasion of the territory of that country, or what is the elevation?
Well, we ran into that problem, and that was a major news story a couple years ago when the Chinese balloon.
Yes.
The Chinese balloon flew over the U.S. I mean, that is the perfect example of this gray area that happens, and I think it goes back to what I was saying about how we don't really know what's going on in outer space, and there's not a lot of there's not a lot of ability for journalism and for people to understand what's going on in space. And I can't remember how the balloon came about, but I think it was probably private citizens or something that saw it, or perhaps it leaked.
It was reported.
It was reported.
Yeah.
And it's almost as if I feel if the balloon was never seen, then we would never have known about it.
Yeah.
That's how I feel. So, but it goes back to your question of, well, what is territory that is governed by the U.S. and what is at what elevation is it not? Now they have established that there are rules on. I can't think of them on the top of my head, but there are rules in terms of that are associated, I think, with the Kármán line and below that and above that, and there's a certain amount of elevation that below that the countries have sovereignty over. But I think the balloon is a perfect example of what we're talking about here, and kind of this gray area of, I think most citizens would argue that wasn't a violation of airspace and of civil liberties, of many things. But the U.S., I believe, if I recall, spent a lot of time trying to play it down and saying that it wasn't a problem. And so, to answer your question, I think it goes back to how the country wants to respond.
Yeah,
it's almost a case by case basis, and that makes it difficult because it's a very diplomatic issue that seems to be controlled by the diplomats, and it seems to be kind of a case-by-case basis, or just saying if nobody knows about it, then if it doesn't happen, and that puts the citizens in a difficult place because we should have more awareness of what's going on and understanding of what our technologies are being used for.
So, do you see the space laws as a collection of laws, regulation, and rules to commercially control space travel, or you see it goes beyond that? Is it just a question of commerce, or also sovereignty of the countries is part of it? And are these laws even contain laws about wars, everything else that could happen in the space, or these initial laws that we call them a space law more regulate the commerce in the space?
I think it's everything. I think space law has different. When we say space law, it's a very broad thing, and like the way I define space law is it's the norms, regulations, and rules that govern the use of outer space, and the way we do that for national interests, it seems to be a little bit different than we do it for commerce, and it seems a little bit different than we do it for space exploration. So I think all those things are trying to be answered by space law frameworks. We've worked pretty hard on the national interest part since that's been going on since the 60s, and I think we're at different areas of maturity in these. Probably pretty mature in national sovereignty. I think quite not mature in commerce, understanding how to do commerce in outer space. Space exploration or private exploration for individuals. I think we're quite not mature in how to do that. So I think we have different maturity levels in those areas.
And it's something still to be discovered and expanded, these laws. And once we confront something like that, usually that's when we say, okay, we need a law here, we need to figure this out.
Right.
But even today, with different nations putting satellites into the orbit, there is a lot of space debris.
Yes, absolutely.
Especially with the older technologies. So who's responsible for cleaning the space? If these are 80% United States responsible for putting those satellites, which I would think there's a large percentage that belongs to the United States, who's responsible for cleaning the debris from the orbit? Because those are dangerous. We have heard several times they actually fell on different countries and they caused damages and harms. So who's responsible for those debris?
Well, I forgot which treaty it was. It was either the 1967 Outer Space Treaty or the Artemis Accords might expand on this. But the countries individually have ownership. The country themselves has ownership of the asset even after it's defunct. So after it becomes unworkable or out of commission. And with that, you would think the country would have the prerogative to clean the debris up. But we haven't really reached a place in space law where there's a rule or regulation that forces a company or forces a country to remove debris. So that creates obvious issues that you were just discussing. In order to do commerce or exploration or do those things safely, there has to be some regulation and cleanup of the debris that could interfere with a lot of these activities. And it is, like I said, an area of space law that is probably a little bit not mature.
Not mature yet. Then let's talk about Starlink and what it did. Starlink put, I don't know, thousands of small satellites. Elon Musk put them in the orbit to cover the whole Earth with internet and give internet to different groups. We know that Ukrainians using a Starlink in the war and control of their drones against Russia. And one instance that had actually some impact on my personal life was Starlink was opened in Iran during the massacre of 50,000 people. But the government of Iran, with help from Russia, they were able to shut down Starlink. So my first question is, what kind of laws are involved here? Because it seems like it's a Wild West in the space. I put the satellite here and I transmit internet down to the ground. People can start using internet by connecting to these satellites. And the other group says, you know what, I can shut you down. And there's no rules, there's no laws to tell the SpaceX or Starlink, you can't put them here and give internet access to this group of people, or tell Russia that, hey, you cannot help this government to disconnect that. So are these also part of this space law, or they are considered something else?
No, absolutely. I would think there's, as I've said, space laws are the rules and regulations and norms that govern this. And yes, this is in that realm of things, of a Starlink satellite being above Iran and Russia interfering with it. There's rules of international armed conflict that are at play here. One thing that is when you think of the rules and regulations of international armed conflict, which are in a lot of ways have similarity to space law or overlap, you have to identify whether the asset is a military or commercial asset. So was Russia interfering with a military asset, or were they interfering with a commercial asset? So those are just some of the things you have to kind of flesh out in answering that question. Now, I would argue it was what we call a dual-use asset, or dual-use piece of technology. It could be used for commercial or military purposes. So then, was Russia's interference an act of war if it was a military asset? Mm-hmm. And this is a Wild West.
It is.
And I mean, that's like a good way to think about it. And I think the U.S. is thinking about these things on a case-by-case basis is oftentimes where they're thinking about these things. The SpaceX Starlink was interfered with when they were above Ukraine as well. Russia interfered with them, so they have the ability to do that. Now, it wasn't clear to me exactly what the repercussions were to Russia if they did that, but if there was repercussions, I don't think we would be told. So that's another issue with space laws. It's a bit opaque.
Yeah.
So if, as you said, Russia was interfering with these satellites, maybe there's an enforcement mechanism we just don't know about, or there was some sort of way the U.S. responded that we just won't know about.
So are you suggesting that there are agreements, treaties that are not open source or available, but it's acknowledged between different powers?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
I think there's probably diplomatic understanding that we don't understand of what's allowed and what's not allowed, what's a gray zone, or there might even be, I can even foresee perhaps there is a list of things that if you do, this is the enforcement. But I would assume that exists, but we don't have access to that. So.
Yes, like many other things.
Right.
So, is there an organization that works on putting together space laws? Are there some international bodies that work on that? And if so, what are those organizations?
There is international bodies. I'm probably not going to do justice and name all of them, but there are different organizations. I believe one of them is a non-profit. It's For All Moonkind.
For All Moonkind, I like that name.
There is other international organizations. I believe, yes, there is. So there is a lot of different people and lawyers thinking about these issues and trying to probably fill in the blanks for the areas in space law that are, like I was saying, that are kind of not mature.
Yes.
And there's a lot of work to be done, and there's people that are very bright that are doing that work.
So it's actively...
Yes, it's a pretty active space. There's lots of space lawyers in that space, and they're international. They're not just in the U.S. There are people studying space law in Europe or in other countries. So there are a lot of people that have an interest in this topic and are researching ways to basically create frameworks and rules and regulations to keep space safe and keep it an economy that can run regularly.
How do you see the future of space travel, space exploration, space laws? How do you see 50 years from now?
It's hard. That's a great question. I mean, it's hard to tell. But just look at what's been accomplished over the past 20 years. So one thing we've talked about is kind of this exponential hockey stick rise in capability over the past 10, 20 years.
Yes.
More so than perhaps, there was in maybe the 70s or 80s. There seems to have been a special discovery that's happened in the 2000s. So if that continues, I think that's pretty exciting, and we could see, 50 years from now, I think it's reasonable to see people living on the moon or Mars. Yeah,
You foresee that within 50 years
Yeah,
time
I do.
frame.
Yeah.
I used to live in New Mexico, and we have a city there. It's called Truth or Consequences. Okay, they named the
That was
city.
the city
Yes,
name? Oh.
yes. They actually, there was a show, Truth or Consequence, and they dared a city to change the city's name or town's name to Truth and Consequence, and this city in New Mexico did it. So whatever the old name was, I don't know, but anyways, Truth and Consequence. Years ago, I believe it was Virgin Space or
Virgin, yeah.
They started building a spaceport there, literally like a terminal for the airlines. So this was a spaceport many years ago. This is at least 15, 20 years ago they started building them. So they foresee a potential for commercial flight, for people just for pleasure, go to space, and not necessarily outer space, but at least they go far enough to see the planet and realize that we're living on a beautiful piece of marble, and we have to take care of it.
Right.
And until you see it from there, you don't realize that there's a lot of other things. We're very small in the grand scheme of this entire
Yes,
creation.
I agree.
Yeah. Anything else you would like to add?
Well, it's hard to stop the conversation.
We can continue. We can continue.
but-
Please.
I think we've covered a lot of ground and a lot of interesting things. It's been really enjoyable to talk about it, and especially having your background in technology and some of the different areas of my background, I think has led to a really fun conversation.
Yes, it has, definitely. I also enjoyed the conversation. And Elon Musk said he wants to go, this is the last, it's not a joke, but he said he wants to go live on the Mars.
Yes.
And I don't know, do you think it's possible in his lifetime, I don't know, he's not that old, that he can travel to Mars and live there? Or do you think we should pay more attention to our planet? Because we know life exists here.
Well, I think we could do both. That's a very lawyerly answer to the question.
Very loyally.
Yes. I mean, I think it's possible that he'll be able to visit Mars. But I do know a lot of people say that. They say we should not be exploring space because, we need to take care of the planet. And I think you can explore space, and I think it goes back to what you were saying. You can explore space and have a greater appreciation for the planet.
Yes.
There's that known effect, as you were describing, of when you go to space and see the Earth, you have this kind of this awe experience, and maybe we need more of that to take care of the planet.
That's good. And last question. If you don't want to answer,
That's fine.
that's fine. Do you think we landed on the moon?
Actually, I think about that a lot, and I don't know. To be honest, I don't know if we're going to keep that. But I don't know where to go with that. I do think about that a lot,
I
though.
will keep this part.
Oh.
But do you really think that? What makes you feel like, no, we didn't? Is it
Well-
because there's a lot of debate?
Well, it goes back to
People come with documents, or what?
one thing that comes to mind is, I was talking about this earlier. It was very cinematic.
Yes.
The what it looked like in terms of the activities of being on the moon, And you have to wonder if it's something that a producer, an executive producer, might create. That's what I focus on a lot, is the cinematic aspect of it. And it's hard for me to say more, but I really don't know.
There is a very good book called Something Funny Happened on the Way to the Moon.
Oh.
And that's a fantastic resource of all these arguments, all the evidence, everything that was in fact pointed out as weakness in this whole landing, moon landing, different issues with cameras, different angles, lights, and just moving of the flag on the moon, and so there's a lot of that.
So what do you think?
Yeah, I was going there.
Okay.
To me, the biggest issue is when NASA was asked for the tapes of the moon landing, they couldn't find it, and eventually they said, "Oh, we recorded something on those tapes."
Oh.
So we don't have the original tapes, right? Whatever we have is people recorded in different places. That is not acceptable. That should be the first huge red flag, that such a huge event for the entire humanity, and you recorded that, and now you can't find the tapes. So that was a point for me but I want to believe that we landed on the moon. I want to believe that there is still decency in our government and the system of government not to come out and give us such a huge lie and maintain that for so many years, because that would be heartbreaking.
Yeah, it would be.
And I want to believe that yes, we went there and we landed on the moon. Joey, it was a fantastic conversation.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. And thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did here. If you like this episode, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, and keep up with future episodes. Thank you very much, and until the next time, goodbye.